All right, guys, before we get to the potential new AD for Ohio State, replacing outgoing Gene Smith, we do have to get to our bi-weekly segment, the Michigan Panic Meter, and mine remains unchanged. I am all the way in the gray. I'm feeling groovy. We got the band back together. We're running it back. Ohio State's in a good spot. All the naysayers can eat my dust. Like, I'm feeling really good about where Ohio State is, and now it's about, all right, what other small changes to the staff do you make, and what other dalliances in the portal do you go after there, Spencer? But I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I'm at least I think I was in the light gray last time, so I'm sticking in the light gray as well. Feeling pretty good about things. Listen, as far as I'm concerned, Michigan winning the national championship, that's a thing of the past. We are on to 2024, if you will. That's old news. Jim Harbaugh is interviewing for jobs. JJ McCarthy is going to the. By the way, you think JJ McCarthy is going to be a good pro?
No,
Yeah,
and I could be wrong, but like
he reminds me of a rich man's Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, he's bigger and more athletic than Kenny is, but like so much of what is spoken about him is the intangibles.
It's like character traits.
Yeah, like he's a great leader.
Which was funny because when you got to the Washington Michigan matchup and you were comparing the two quarterbacks, it was this whole like everyone was like salivating over McCarthy, like, oh, he's a great leader and he's just got this toughness to him and he's always going to find a way to win. And then the other side, you were like, man, Michael Penix Jr., that guy's got a dot of accuracy. He's got such great vision. He sees the field well, and it's like that's kind of the stuff that matters more when you go to the next level than just being able to be a good leader. But okay,
yeah. I mean,
fine.
granted, the thing that, and this is not something you really got to see a lot of in Michigan's offense because the way it's set up. I think something that could help him a long way is if he has some processing powers. We never got to see at Michigan. I think you look at CJ Stroud went from a great college quarterback to potentially one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL because the Texans really not stumbled upon, but really understood his ability to diagnose a defense pre and post snap was otherworldly. And like that, honestly, like you want to get to the difference between CJ Stroud and Bryce Young year 1 in the NFL, that goes a long way. So I can't speak to the processing power of JJ McCarthy, but like the tools look pretty average. And, now granted, I don't really love any of these quarterbacks. I'm pretty nervous about all of them for a different reason. But at this point, I will say I'd be shocked if JJ wasn't a top 20 pick, given they just won the national championship and given the fact that there is probably 25% of the NFL looking for quarterbacks and looking to take a run at quarterbacks. That always kind of pushes guys up in the draft a little bit farther ahead of where they should go.
He's doing what Cardale Jones didn't, which was I'm maximizing on my. Now he's got more like obviously games under his belt and all that and experience, but he's maximizing on his potential now versus being like, oh, I'll come back and see what happens next year if I were to lose to Ohio State or not win. Like his stock will never be higher, so he's doing that. Also, in some ways, the Texans did kind of stumble into C.J. Stroud because David Tepper decided he didn't want C.J. Stroud. So what was your other option? They were like, well, I guess we got to take him. And it's worked out for him. So thanks, David Tepper, if you're a Texans fan.
Don't get me started on that clown. Everything that I
know
felt
it hits home for you. That's why
every time I talk about the Haslams, a lot of that agita has been transferred over to Dave Tepper, a man who's taking a middle of the road franchise in Carolina and running it right down the toilet. But you had something to say about Harbaugh before we get to the new AD, by the way.
So he's the only coaching candidate in the NFL that's interviewed for a job at this point because the other guys, the other assistants and things, they can't interview until – actually, I take that back. Belichick interviewed because his was a parting of ways, that type of thing. But any assistants –
and anybody who had a bye this last week, so Baltimore and San Francisco assistants were able to interview just as a quick interjection.
Right. So, but other than that, like he's one of the he can get a leg up on this stuff because he's not tied to another team at the moment or anything like that. So he interviewed over the weekend, or I guess on Monday he interviewed technically MLK Day, and. Like we know, like what the tea leaves are suggesting is that he's kind of been linked to them, and there's mutual interest, and it's just about kind of going through the formalities in the process to see if they land there. And listen, this could all change and he could come back and then maybe this conversation's a moot point. But should Ohio, like, does winning against Michigan without Jim Harbaugh there next year, if that's what happens here, and J.J. McCarthy for that matter, and these guys that you couldn't beat, does it lessen a win over Michigan if that's the case?
No. And here's I cannot give the malcontents, the Anthony Limas, I cannot give them this. There's plenty of times where Ohio State has beat a bad Michigan team and vice versa. And honestly, I'm very happy that that the rivalry's back, even though Ohio State's on the wrong side of it. But no, and one, I'm not buying that. Even if Harbaugh and McCarthy go off to the NFL, Roman Wilson off to the NFL, they got some other guys potentially jumping off to the NFL. I'm not buying that all of a sudden they're going to be a 7-win team. So as long as Michigan is still a 9, 10, 11-win team, and I have I've watched Alex Orgy. I have no reason to believe that dude can't be.
That's in your Google history?
That is, I've done a lot of research on orgy and orgies. Just anything orgy I've gone into, not because I want to, not because I want to be the guy after the guy, but because, quite frankly, this is what is expected upon me. But no, the Michigan could win one game next year, and beating Michigan still is going to matter for something.
Yeah.
And any fan saying, "Oh, well, it's not going to be the same." Honestly, you just want Ryan Day fired. It's all confirmation bias. There's nothing the guy can do other than win every game next year. And even then, you're probably not going to give him credit either.
Well, two things. We can't say that the main goal is beat Michigan, and fans clamor for that and yell about it and scream into the abyss about it and say Ryan Day should be fired because he hasn't done that the last 3 years. And then have then have it be like, well, he has to beat Michigan a specific way. It can't, you can't change the goalposts like that when you continue to say that the number one goal and the main goal of this team every year is just to strictly beat Michigan, no matter what they look like, no matter who's out there coaching, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether they got the worst quarterback in the country. I don't care. It shouldn't matter about any of that. It should just be strictly, you got to beat Michigan. That's the number one thing every single year that matters to Ohio State fans. And that's what they've told me the last year. So I have to believe.
But let's just be honest here. We both know that if you beat a weaker Michigan team and then, lose in the playoffs, and then next year going into the year, the knock will be, well, he's only beaten Michigan when they were down.
Yeah.
It's just the unfortunate. There's just that segment of people. It's just chaotic and it's toxic. And I get it. I do. Listen, I for all things I say about them being overreactive, I do understand the central thesis and disgruntled part of what they're saying. I just think they're blowing out of proportion. Now, we have spent 47 minutes on this podcast, and we have yet to we've neglected one of the more interesting topics on Ohio State, which is that they could be settling in on a new AD. Reports are that nothing's finalized yet, but that Texas A&M athletic director Ross Bjork will be the man that takes over for Gene Smith in Columbus. And I got to be honest with you, considering how many really strong candidates there were off the Gene Smith tributary and the AD tree, there are anywhere from 5 to 10 super qualified candidates at other Power 5 jobs that I'm shocked that a place as insulated as regional and as we look after our own, I'm shocked that they went with a guy with no Ohio State ties to be the athletic director, given just how furtive soil that the Gene Smith the farming is for all the ADs. I'm butchering most of this. But I was blown away. It's not like there aren't guys to go to that worked under Gene or that have a real ability to do this job.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with Bjork, and first of all, I want to be clear. I always have a hard time assessing what makes what's a good AD. I think for fans of especially college football, the first thing you're always going to look at is, okay, well, what did he do with the football program? What coach did he bring in? And to clarify too, we checked this before the show. He was not the person who hired Jimbo Fisher. He was the person who fired Jimbo Fisher this past year. but he was not the person who brought Jimbo Fisher in. So I think that is important context in terms of that specific situation, because I'm telling you, that's the first thing fans are going to look at. But like, to me, like, ADs are just kind of like spokespeople for the department, for the athletic department. And they're the most important job. And maybe this is why he's the number one option, or the guy that it looks like they're going to hire, is, are they good at fundraising? Because you mentioned too before the show that from just kind of looking back on some of his other stops that he's had, every time he's left, it seems like people aren't that upset about it. They're kind of like, okay, fine. And so I just wonder, like, is he not like is he not a great personality and people don't really care if he leaves, but is he really good at fundraising? I would imagine, like, Texas A&M, they have one of the more, from what I understand, bankrolled booster and alumni bases where they could really tap into some of that and bring in a lot of NIL money. So maybe he did a good job down there. It seems like in recent years they were getting a lot of top recruits because they were buying into the NIL stuff. And I know a couple years ago, I think Jimbo actually had one of the top recruiting class in the country, if not the top recruiting class in the country. He's not going to be there to see it through, obviously, but so I think that matters. And maybe that's where Ohio State's looking, is like, hey, we need to really focus on NIL and get that piece of this puzzle figured out. And Bjork is a guy that they think can do that. So that's my guess as to why they like him. But I don't know that, like, there's some hot take to have about an AD that really neither of us have been around or can really attest to being, oh, he's great or he's terrible. I think it's just going to be one of those things, like, you got to kind of see what happens. Now, if he comes in and Ryan Day, shits the bed this next year and he fires him and brings in a coach and it's the wrong coach, then yeah, I think we'll all have opinions about him. But right now, it's just kind of like, we don't know what he brings to the table that attracted him to Ohio State. But there's got to be something there, and I'm imagining it's probably a financial piece that is why they're so attracted to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the coaching perspective, he inherited Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and this was his first chance to kind of fire Jimbo and find a coach to take over for him. And I think we all remember the Mark Stoops turn into Mike Elko thing. So I think that's interesting. Whether that's something to blame Ross Bjork for or not, I don't know. But I mean, even if you look at the Ole Miss situation where he took over, he inherited Hugh Freeze, and that team was having a lot of success with Hugh Freeze. But then came the NCAA nightmares, and maybe Ross Bjork stuck with Hugh Freeze a little too long, and then he didn't stick the landing by hiring somebody that was, I think it was Matt Luke, who was just kind of an assistant off that team. So, I personally, by the way, I personally love Mike Elko and I personally love Stoops. So, like, I actually think whomever he had decided on for Texas A&M probably was going to work out better than Jimbo because the expectations are going to be different. But, like, we don't really have a frame of reference, or at least a good frame of reference for coaching hires. And I do like, Ole Miss fans weren't sad to see him go. I don't think Texas A&M fans are sad to see him go. And I think when you look at the fundraising thing, it almost makes me wonder if there was a sins of the father situation with Gene Smith, where if maybe Ohio State leaders felt like Gene Smith, whether it was reticence, whether it just wasn't, whether it was age, whatever it was, they didn't feel like he prioritized and attacked NIL to the degree necessary, and that might have been what has played into Ohio State and Michigan being neck and neck these last couple of years. And maybe that's what hurt any of the candidates that were from the Gene Smith tree, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like, well, he didn't do this. These guys learned under him. We can't have that. So we got to go, behind door B, because at least this guy has just gross and kind of ridiculous levels of NIL that he's kind of threw around there over the first 3 or 4 years of NIL in college football.
I'm convinced that, again, just face value, looking at this thing, surface level, we don't know a ton yet, and he hasn't officially been hired. I'm imagining the NIL stuff had a lot to do with this hire. If they believe or they've seen the results of him being a good fundraiser at Texas A&M, and I'll read more up on that before we jump on and do the next show, then I would imagine that probably played a big role into why they're bringing him in, because that's a huge piece. I mean, it's always a huge piece about how much money you can bring into any athletic department, any organization, but especially now in today's day and age with college football and recruiting, it is exponentially important. So I'm guessing that has a lot to do with it.
Can I tell you just something? Just having seen him, he kind of looks like PJ Fleck with hair, and he kind of also looks a little bit like John Lynch. I don't know why, but that bugs me. And there's just something about a guy named Ross. Like, you're going from a guy named Gene to a guy named Ross. These are very non-scientific
The
reactions.
one syllable names don't do it for you, huh?
It's like,
even though you have a one syllable name.
Oh, this isn't about me, Spencer. Okay, don't get hateful on this, Nick. That's a classic name, Gene Ross. Like, are we playing Parcheesi or are we running athletic director? Are we running athletic programs here? Name wise doesn't do a lot for me. Although one of the other names was Pat, so I don't know. I was really hot on the names thing. Did just athletic directors have weird or just oddly old timey names? I don't know. There's no real way to go here.
I honestly think a lot of them have old timey names because they were probably hired in like 1970 and they're just still there.
You think Ross Bjork is actually a vampire?
I mean, not him, but there's definitely a lot of athletic departments, and I know this from like working in athletic departments where like they've just kept an AD around for so long, and they finally like retired maybe recently. So yeah, I think it's a lot of just like the same person's been in those roles forever, which is why I question like ADs. They're important, and I think the fundraising piece is the biggest thing. But I always just wonder like they're just kind of like mouthpieces for the department because you can't have every coach go and like talk to every other athletic department and figure these things out. You need somebody to kind of be the spokesperson. So that's what they become. They're like the Roger Goodell of it all. But are they really doing all these things and implementing all these things? I don't know. I just don't know like what. I always just wonder like the qualifications needed to become an AD. I get that you need a certain degree level. I just think they're just fundraisers with a bigger title. That's all it is.
Spencer German thinks ADs don't matter for shit. At Spencito _ on Twitter. Ross Bjork at Spencito _ Any ADs listening to this, if you can tell us what an athletic director does other than fundraising, at Spencito _ at Nick Wilson says, drop it in the comments. Of course, guys, are you pumped about Ross Bjork? And if so, please tell us why, because I just there's just nothing erotic about hiring an athletic director. But as we are a new podcast, please make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. We could have an interesting week. Will Harbaugh get a job? What other Michigan players could go to the NFL? What other coaching changes could Ohio State have? We've got the portal news. Somebody like Caleb Downs. We'll see where he ends up, if he ends up somewhere else. All this stuff to come on the back half of this week, guys. But appreciate you, Spencer. Go Bucks.